start.
Watching radio control stuff crash is fun.
Well, you know I build ships, and one of the biggest problems we run into when building ships is when we start rigging them, these nice little delicate masts and yards and everything, like right here, they all bend over when you rig them because there's no rigidity to the plastic. And in the case of some kits, the plastic's super soft, and there's no way in the world you'll ever be able to rig any lines to them or anything. So, borrowing on some techniques I learned eons ago from Walt Fink, he did a program on soldering here 20, 30 years ago or something like that. Anyway, it's pretty simple if you're, I mean, you don't need a blowtorch. I have a 30 watt, I think it's 30 watt soldering iron. Nothing big, no great shakes, but you can see this is going to run in 700 scale, about 3.5 inches. Has a couple yards on it. It's from the days when the yard arm was molded right into the mast, and if you know ships, the yard arm is separate from the mast. It's a separate piece that's attached to the mast. On old sailing ships, it was actually movable to the mast. So get some brass rod. Most of the time you're going to have to get this off the internet now because Detail Associates is gone. As a guy at Displays Hobby says, even train guys don't build scratch build anymore. So what I do is get a nice rigid piece of plywood. Use plywood. I tried it on other things and found out that, like glass, while it's a smooth surface, it's a great heat sink. All the heat goes from the soldering iron into the glass, nothing ever transfers to the brass or the solder. So a piece of plywood works good. Then I use ordinary graph paper. This happens to be a centimeter graph paper, but anything can be used. What I'm trying to do is use the graph paper to square everything, because the yard arms and masts on modern ships are usually square to one another. Once you get this all built up, then you can rig it with stretch sprue or canis line or whatever you want to use to make your little wires and all that stuff. But if you don't have it, your mast starts doing this, and then you tension something else and it does this, and you can actually have the mast start doing, you know, little wavy things, you know, and the yard arms do wavy things, and everything ends up out of square, and it really looks bad. You're better off not doing it and just using the plastic parts and forget about rigging it. So what I did today was I have about a dozen models at home that are all in about the same stage where they need mast or yard built for them. I hope this will be a fruitful year and I end up finishing a bunch of stuff. But when I did this and broke it, another reason to replace it with brass. A couple models I built like 25, 30 years ago, they got damaged. One got damaged at a model meeting. A little kid just took the mast right off of it. So I got this little guy like that. Goes on the Japanese battleship. It's actually a spreader. It goes horizontal like this. And because one yard is parallel straight through, I lined it up on the graph paper, marked it off, taped it down, and then these other pieces, which you would think would just be straight lines, they're actually these two guys at the top go at different angles than the bottom one, so you can't just like go with a straight line. You got these two going at a different angle from the upper one. So I set it up today, and one of the problems I've always run into is I want to solder this like I would solder a car radiator or any number of other things, automotive or bigger, and you can't do that. So that's hot. I line it all up and tape it down, and then no more Radio Shacks, but you get something like this at a hardware store. It's called No Corrode. It's just a soldering paste, and it's a flux. It's going to clean the surfaces. And I have this little hook piece of wire, and it's hooked for a reason. I'll show you in a minute, but you're just going to touch some of that right in the middle. The tape keeps it all aligned. You hope, because I'm attaching 5 different pieces, which is kind of a stretch for me. I normally don't do too many things like that. Usually it's just a crisscross. Because I'm old, to control the solder, I end up trimming off the tiniest piece I can get, pretty much. Because late people. You have 2 options here. You can actually hit it with the heat and let the flux work one time, because it will clean it up. Or you can put that piece of solder in it now, and it should work. You don't want to touch the solder. That's one of the things. You want to touch, if you think of this in a bigger term, that's that piece of solder I just cut off. You want to touch the brass around the outside. If you touch the solder's going to go up on the soldering tip. Well, not that soldering tip because it's not tinned well, but what you want to do is touch the brass around it. The heat will transfer to the solder, melt the solder and suck it down, and the flux will help flow down the different pieces of brass you have going. So it worked today earlier, and we'll try it again. And I'm very tired, so I was doing this really good at 2 o'clock this afternoon. It's okay, but it's not great. So I'm going to cut off a tiny piece again. Because this wire's so fragile in that, you really don't want to spend your time trying to file it or anything. In fact, usually I find that if I sand it, I get a better result than trying to get a file on it. The file's too coarse. Sanding stick like this, as long as it doesn't have any snags in it, because if you have a snag in it, you're going across the wire, it's going to catch the wire, or the rod, and then that's going to bend the rod. So let's see if I can get this to work. Yeah, it might be a little dirty. No, it's sticking together, and now it's crooked. So I'm going to try heating it up and moving these legs again. Problem is the one leg keeps popping up because maybe the paper is making it do that. I think I got it. So one thing that happens if you have multiple yards on a ship, they'll usually be in the same plane if you look at it from the side. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4. They'll all be in the same plane. So if you are working on one of these, you either want to put all the yards down first and then put the mast on top of it. And if you don't do it that way, you can put the mast down, but then you have to put a cripple on each side so that it holds the yards in the same alignment. So what I did here on this one, which I did earlier, I put the yard arms down first. This is for a King George V class battleship that I built years ago. And then I just put the rod down on top of it. So I'm going to attempt the same thing here. And this is the mast for it. And the little hook, so you can get all the way around it. I stumbled into that. Actually, that was my handle to hold it. And then one time I stuck in the flux the wrong direction. And it actually made more sense to have a little hook on it. So I got plenty of flux on there. And if I get it aligned, tape down both ends. I want to try something new. And I haven't tried this yet. We used to have this at Motorola. And it's flux and solder. Hypodermic type thing. And I already decided looking at the tips I didn't like that part of it. But I figure might be able to get pretty darn good control out of this. I bought this on Amazon a couple nights ago. I stumbled across it looking for something else. I'm like, God, I gotta get me some of that. It's all addictive. But I'm thinking I could be wrong, and you guys are gonna find out with me. I'm thinking this might prove valuable. We used to, if we had some bad circuit boards go through a machine, we'd have to pull them off, pull off a resistor or a capacitor or whatever the heck was bad or placed on the machine or placed on the board incorrectly. If Mark was here, he'd be frowning right now bringing this up. We used to run stuff and we knew it was wrong. But they wanted quantity over quality, so we did it anyway. Well, the top joint held. The bottom joint's gonna hold too. So that might be a better option. That was like $14. Bought it on Prime, so it didn't cost me any shipping. And these two here and these two here are going to replace these. So years ago, when I first, before I joined the club, in fact, at your last club contest ever on Milwaukee Road, I entered both of these at that. And they've got damaged. I'm going to fix them up and get them better. But this is commonly what you can start with. And you can make everything a lot lighter and a lot nicer looking if you want to by just doing this. Not terribly difficult. And anything I did here applies to making a landing gear. Landing gear is nothing more than a rod, another rod at a right angle, case of these, I sanded a bevel onto the brass. It sands really easy with a stick. You can take a little file and file a concave part into it, so you have the round rod and the concave to make your axle. And you gotta do that when you're doing a lot of scratch building or vacuum-formed airplanes. And it's a good way to get from point A to B. And it's not terribly difficult to do. I find it quite easy to do. So that's about it. Caliper's useful. I bought this at Aldi. I don't know if it's dead accurate, but if you're just measuring at your table and not transferring any information to another person, it's 100% perfect. Now, if I was going to say, Dave, I measured it at my house and I'm gonna send you a figure and he's gonna use his calculator to figure it out. Well, if one of our calipers isn't right, then that would be a problem. But when you're working on your own bench, a digital caliper, this cost me 17 bucks at Aldi. You can buy them kind of cheap and they work good. Decent little snip, a divider, pencil. Everybody has sanding sticks. You go to Sally's and buy those. They're cheap and they're big, and that's all you need. So, any questions? Yes.
Is that current solder you have there, is that a rosin core or?
This is a rosin core, and I suppose it'd work without the flux, but
Was that silver solder or regular solder?
this is just regular solder. This is 60-10-40 lead. This I just used is 63-37. So they melt pretty. I mean, these melt very good.
How do you clean the flux off?
Dawn dish soap. When in doubt, Dawn dish soap.
Or isopropyl alcohol.
Alcohol will do it, a little acetone, but I generally go for Dawn dish soap. It's a miracle worker. It does so much.
And you paint it after that?
Yeah. Just prime it, airbrush it a little, and make sure you got decent coverage on it, and it should work out real nice. This, you can pick these up for 15, 20 bucks. You don't need a massive amount of money to do stuff. I mean, you're limited by your own. You're limited by your own funding and the creativity. But funding should not be that big of a problem, because most of the stuff I use elsewhere. I do a lot of scratch building, so this, and for photo etch, this is the bomb to measure photo etch.
And you can test the accuracy that easily enough with a drill bit.
Oh yeah. I don't know, I just, on a whim I bought it. I wasn't sure I'd get a lot of use out of it. It's become one of my most useful tools. Especially if you're doing photo etch railings down the side of a ship and you need to measure out or something, it works really good for that.
Yeah, I found one at a garage sale for 50 cents. It's one of the mechanical ones.
Mm-hmm. So that's it.
Well, thanks, Charlie.
All right.